Well, what's up, Red Letter Disciples? It's Zach Zinder, the host of this podcast, and our podcast has a goal to challenge its listeners to be greater disciples of Jesus. I believe that when we all live up to the calling of being a great disciple of Jesus, we give the world a greater expression of who Jesus is, and that's enough to change the world. We got a great guest today, Jack Kalleberg. I'll tell you about him in just a moment, but first, there's something I'm doing that's starting this week that's really awesome. It's totally free, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Inside of Carey Nieuwhof's Art of Leadership Academy, I am hosting a space where we are unpacking each of the 7 trends for the church year. Every beginning of the year, I look forward to Carey Nieuwhof's annual church trends, and this year he's got 7 disruptive trends we got to be paying attention to. And so I'll take a deep dive look into these, and we'll have conversations inside of his academy on what these 7 trends mean for discipleship. We're going to do that each of the next 7 Wednesdays at noon Central. And again, it is totally free to join. I'll throw the link in the description and in the show notes, but it starts this Wednesday. And so I would love for you to be there, because I think it's one thing to notice the trends, and Carey does a beautiful job of noticing them. But what does that mean for your church? What does that mean for our church body? Not only are we doing the Wednesdays, but I'm dropping videos on the YouTube channel every week unpacking each one of these trends. And so join me, it's free. Today's guest is Jack Kalleberg. Jack is the executive director at Christ Greenfield. He is the co-host of the Lead Time podcast with Tim Allman, and he has a long career in the U.S. Army as a musician and just an all-around churchman. And I'm super honored to talk with Jack and to hear from him. We talk about the opportunity cost of forming pastors, why we need to form more pastors. We also do a deep dive into what happened at the 2-day Koinonia gathering in Las Vegas. For all those that couldn't attend, a good summary for you. And so I hope you'd enjoy today's podcast. If you like this podcast, The Red Letter Disciple, please do me a favor and hit 5 stars on Spotify if you listen on Spotify. On Apple, if you listen on Apple, write a review too. Tell me who your favorite guest was. If you don't want to give us 5 stars, would you email me at hello@redletterchallenge.com and let me know why? That'd be awesome. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're putting a lot of new stuff on YouTube. We would love for you to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the future episodes. But without further ado, let's get to today's episode with Jack Kalleberg. Let's do this. All right, listeners, this is a special day, episode 119 on January 19th. Everything is lining up, especially with our guest today, Jack Kalleberg. What's up, Jack? How you doing today?
Hey, Zach. It's great to be here with you, man.
It is great to be here with you. I've been on your podcast, Lead Time with Tim Allman, but not you on mine yet. So welcome. Yeah. So, man, happy to have you. For listeners who may not know you yet, can you kind of briefly share a little bit about yourself and your role at Christ Greenfield?
Yeah, so Jack Kalleberg, I've shared a little bit on my podcast, a little bit about my story, but I was baptized into the Norwegian Lutheran Church deep in the fjords of Norway.
Wow, okay.
In a church that was probably well over, it predates the Reformation.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. With family buried in there going back generations. Migrated to the U.S. I'm an American citizen because my mother was American. My father was Norwegian. Raised mostly in my youth Pentecostal because that was what my mom was into. Didn't really take well for me. I was not big on the speaking in tongues and stuff like that. And it actually got really interesting to me when they started pressing on the idea of like getting rebaptized. I was not comfortable with that. So I spent much of my young adulthood I definitely considered myself a Christian, but probably an unchurched Christian. Had a lot of my faith formation from my grandmother. I used to visit her in Norway every summer. It's during that time that I actually sat down and read the Bible and fell in love with Jesus and the Christian faith, but still didn't fully know what that meant because I wasn't part of a catechism program. You know, it was just really the Bible and my grandma and other people that spoke into me. Joined the military, so I served 22 years in the military, musician in the U.S. Army band. My first passion in life was music. I was really talented out of school. Passed the audition to get into the U.S. Army band, Did that for 4 years, active duty, 101st Airborne Division, and then shifted over to the National Guard and retired after 18 years, so 22 years total with the military. Went to school on the GI Bill. It was a funny story. I was going to pursue music in college and went to go talk to the music professor. And he's like, well, you just came out of the Army band, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, I don't know if this is going to help you at all. I think you should go get a business degree. So, so I ended up enrolling in the business department and initially studied computer information systems and then transferred over to finance. I fell in love with finance when I went over to ASU and took my first finance course. And it was around that time that I got married. I married a lady, a really lovely lady that I met in high school, my wife, Marta. We met as sophomores at North High School in Phoenix. We both lived in kind of rough parts of town in West Phoenix. And she went off away and got her master's degree. I went off away, joined the Army, and we both sort of came back into town at the same time and reconnected and dated. And fairly quickly after dating, got engaged and married and realized that that the Lord had brought us together. So it was right around that time that I was starting to think, well, hey, we're starting a family. Maybe if we're starting a family, it'd be good to be a part of a church. And so what is that going to be? My parents had then started teasing around the idea of getting back into Lutheranism again. That's what my dad really wanted. And so that was kind of the deal. It's like my mom's like, okay, well, if my husband's going to go to church, we'll go to a Lutheran church. And initially they had gone to a Wells church. I had visited this Wells church while I was on leave in the military. My mom wanted me to come and visit, so I came. And I remember vividly, she introduced me to the pastor. And his first comment to me was like, Jack, it's nice to meet you. I just want to let you know you can't have communion here. It was like, okay. I didn't know what to make out of that. I was like, okay, well, don't worry. I'm not coming back. Right.
Yeah. So he said that before even asking you anything about your beliefs.
Literally the first sentence he said to me.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was fascinating. But I was fascinated a little bit with Lutheranism because I had the heritage of it, right? And I was baptized into it. So when I was in college, I was just out of curiosity. I was just very curious about the topic. I studied history of world religions, and that no small amount was given towards the Reformation as a big part of world history, and it really kind of sparked some curiosity to me. And when I learned about Martin Luther, I said, that's a really interesting guy. I think I want to learn more about that. And he really appealed to me a lot. His faith, his courage, his desire to bring the church to the scriptures, right, and make sure that the scriptures was the main thing standing over the church. I really loved that. And so at a later point in time, my parents actually started coming here to Christ Greenfield because they had moved to the East Valley. They were looking for a church that had a really great youth program because I had a much younger sister, and they ended up at Christ Greenfield. And so I actually found out about Christ Greenfield through my parents because my sister was in the youth program here. Cool. I came to a service. The hospitality was great. The preaching was phenomenal. I said, this is my home. And my wife liked it too. We were engaged at the time. We ended up becoming members of Christ Greenfield. It was the first place I ever chose to become a member of a congregation. Went through I think it was a 3-month new member class, every Saturday, and became members here at Christ Greenfield. This was the year 2000. And then we got married here. So Pastor Wiesman married Marta and I, and then baptized my son Christian. And it was great. And in that process, I was working in finance, right? I'd gotten my finance degree. I'd started off at Honeywell as a credit analyst and then moved into the small business world and started a boutique with some friends, a boutique commercial lending company. And I was their chief of operations, focusing on developing all of their underwriting systems and their software systems. I was a real systems guy, but also a finance analytical guy. And it was around 2006 or so, I got recruited to be a member of the church council here at Christ Greenfield. And they wanted me in there because of my knowledge of finance. They were going through a lot of financial trouble. And so that really started a different season of my serving here. First as an elected, what we now call a board, but back then council member. And then you had the crash. So I was in commercial lending. You had the financial crash, the real estate crash, which meant the business I was working in, basically the business had disappeared. Yeah. There was a little bit of an infight in the business I was working in. Clearly, the roadmap was this company was imploding in on itself. I needed to start looking for new work. It was right around that time I was exiting my term as the controller, and they were hiring a new business manager role. So I got hired as a very part-time business manager here at the church. In a very interesting situation, there was a dual reporting status. The pastor was reporting to the council, and the business manager was reporting to the council. Okay. And that was kind of a weird, awkward situation. It was a bit of a two-headed snake that was happening. Honestly, some of that was due to a lack of trust around, because they had dealt with some stewardship issues and stuff like that. And, stuck with it. And I've now served with 3 senior pastors here at Christ Greenfield, Tim Allman being the one that has been.
Lord bless you for serving with Tim, man. Jeez, yeah, my goodness.
It's been a great season of flourishing. He took, working closely with him as a partner, grew my job. He saw the need of my job. My job got folded in under that of the senior pastor, which I think was a really good move. And then he expanded that to full-time and eventually became a director of operations, and now has been shifted into the role. We just call it executive director, which, if you know how non-denom church functions, there's usually a role called an XP, an expat, executive pastor. That's literally my job description. It's just, we just call it executive director because I'm not an ordained guy, but I pretty much hold all those same responsibilities. And
what a journey, great. Bro.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
What a journey. Yeah. And as part of that, it's neat to see, kind of as you step into something, God, even halfway, God shows you the next thing, and you make that step, and you make that step. And I really see you guys at Christ Greenfield as being, a really leading, pioneering church. And obviously working alongside of Tim, you've taken on a pretty vocal role as well when it comes to not just Christ Greenfield, but the larger church body. And so why are you doing that? Like, not every church needs to do that. You can focus on your local church. What got you, and I would say alongside of Tim, what got you kind of roped into this, that this is a real passion project for you?
It's not a path that I laid out for myself. I just want to say that.
Does it feel like you're back in the Army? That's the
sometimes I have. Yeah,
I just want to play music.
Well, I'll tell you, the Lord brought me in. That's kind of what the military develops in people. They build gritty people who don't shy away from conflict, right? And that's what's necessary. That doesn't necessarily represent all clergy, right? And so that's kind of a unique thing that's brought into the environment here at Christ Greenfield. Now, when Tim came on board, his number one other than Jesus and the gospel, of course, is his number one passion, but as a leader, as a visionary, his vision for Christ Greenfield is that we would be an institution that prioritizes leadership development and develops people from within. And that's something that he brought with him from the very beginning of his call. It's something he was very transparent about when he was interviewing for this role. People loved it. The lay leaders here loved that idea. I would say that the congregation is a very forward-thinking congregation that wants to be challenged and wants to be engaged in ministry and mission. That's something that they wanted, and that's why they wanted to call Tim. And so he leaned into that. And so one of the very first things that we did to lean into that is we got connected with Leadership Network. Leadership Network was kind of a big deal at the time. They were cutting edge, and then they're still in the conversation, but they had put together some accelerator cohorts, and we managed to get some invitations into that, and we started getting into things like AI and big data and, how to use technology. It was wild. I was in a cohort with Mark Driscoll. That was interesting. And so I was, part of the team that went with him. And what was fascinating was, and then we got into like leadership development and, how churches were multiplying leaders and multi-site. And, it was just fascinating kind of hearing some of the systems that churches had developed when you had a lot of permission to figure out what were the systems to reach a community. Now, I don't agree with some of the theology and a lot of the non-denoms and stuff, but what they do have is a lot of freedom to figure out how they want to implement their ministry.
Yeah.
And to run experiments and to run tests and figure out what works and what doesn't work as they're thinking about growing and expanding. And one key thing emerged that we could see was, number one, there are really great systems outside of our church context that we can emulate. Number two, churches that are growing because they've taken on a bold move to start new things and to multiply, right? They've set really big vision, and it catalyzes the congregation to step up to that vision. Another big factor was they build leaders from within, right? Big, healthy, growing, multiplying churches, they put a heavy emphasis on replicating people who can do what we do and doing that in the local context, right? Because our confessional statements are identical to any other LCMS confessional, but there's a different culture here that exists. There's a different, you go through our new member class, you're going to hear about Christ, not just the Bible and Jesus, you're also going to hear about our values as a church. And so there's a significant value of replicating leaders who have already bought into that, right? And want to carry that vision forward, right? So now what churches do in that situation is they identify people, they see a calling in people, and then they give them the training as they're implementing that leadership, that ministry hands-on, right? So they call it like the 70-30 rule. Like about 70% of what you need to know as a leader is actually hands-on experience, and about 30% of it is head knowledge. And so they have systems to bring that head knowledge in, seminaries, online seminaries, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
let me add to that a little bit about the story. So where does the ULC come in? Coming out of these types of experiences, we made a commitment. We said, hey, and this is kind of the way I phrased it, is like, hey, what one church can do, another church can do. There's no reason why we as an LCMS church can't do some of these great innovative things and be multiplying and multiply multiple campuses. And so it was the year 2020, we said, hey, let's have this cool idea, the 20 in 20 vision, 20 campuses in 20 years, big and bold. It's a long period of time. And then kind of out of that conversation was, if we're going to get good at doing this, identifying leaders to multiply campuses, why don't we create something that the things that we're learning to do that, because we're going to have to be like best in the world at raising up leaders. Why don't we take what we're learning, put together a type of a consultancy group, and give that away to the wider LCMS church? And that's really ultimately the genesis of the ULC is, we want to take what we're learning, we want to give it away to our fellow Lutherans so that they can benefit. We're paying the dumb tax, right? And then you get to benefit from that, and we're great. Give it away. That's kind of really ultimately what it boiled down to.
Yeah, and I think to verify or to kind of confirm what you've gone through, like we're really thinking through that at our local context at King of Kings. We've got a vision similar to multiply, to have 10 campuses in 20 years. Y'all have double what we were going for. So congrats.
Depends on how fast we get there. I don't know if 20 is going to work, but it's a worthy goal.
but we're sitting at 3 campuses, and our last campus, was a merge, and we recognized in that the Lord brought it together in a really beautiful way. But the way in which we did that is probably not the healthiest. We really need to get underneath leadership development and raising up leaders, not just pastors, but leaders across all of our campuses. And so I did several interviews. You guys were one of them with 5 churches. Y'all were the only LCMS just because there's not many like us. And it really, the number one thing I walked away from is, if you want to be a multiplying church, like multi-campus multiplying church, is you got to somehow create local and national momentum in sort of the college age, young adult, that the churches that are doing this best are replicating leaders and have some sort of local and national momentum, which you guys have through the local, what you're doing, but also the ULC's bringing the national. And so I think it's fabulous, and it's one of the things that obviously I want to do a deep dive in is the pastoral formation talks that we're trying to figure out. And, you guys have been a leading voice in this for quite some time. And I kind of entered into the fray, if you will, online maybe about 6 months or so ago when Tim was silenced. And at the same time, when it felt like things were being restricted at the national synodical level, that our local mission is going to be way more complex. And the synod is not helping, it is hurting when it comes to like us accomplishing what I think is a pretty beautiful multiplying local church mission. And so let's dive into it. And I'd love to start. You recently wrote an article addressing kind of the cost of forming pastors through our seminaries. And so before we kind of get into the response it generated and the stuff that came out of it, like what initially compelled you to write that in the first place?
Honestly, somebody just sent us an email and said, hey, you should look at these numbers. And then Tim's like, well, Jack's the data nerd. Jack, why don't you work on this? Right?
Thanks,
and he
Tim.
sent it to me and gave it to me kind of as an assignment. I said, yeah, I like doing this kind of stuff. And then I was thinking, well, how would I talk about this topic? Well, it's a stewardship issue ultimately, right? And then I use the term opportunity costs. This is a term that comes up in economics and finance, right? So what does opportunity cost mean? Well, we all know this when we think about budgeting our time, right? There's 24 hours in the day. And so these 24 hours in the day means that I've got to decide what I'm going to do today and what I can't do today. I don't know of anybody that's got such a small task list that they're going to get every single thing that they need done in a single day. So they've got to make decisions of what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And what you decide to do today and not do today, that's an opportunity cost. You had an opportunity to do something different. You chose to do this instead, right? The same thing is true with money. When you choose to fund something, right, long term, God will give you all the resources that you need. Short term, your budget is finite. Your annual budget is finite. Your quarterly budget is finite. So you are making decisions to fund something. And then what you're also doing by choosing to fund something is you're choosing not to fund something else, right? And that thing that you're choosing not to do or are unable to do, that thing is called an opportunity cost. Now, what wise stewards do, what wise financial managers do, is they're conscious of that. They don't just decide, can I afford to do something? They say, can I afford to do something, and what am I giving up by funding this, right? So that's really kind of the heart behind the paper that I wrote. It wasn't necessarily to say we shouldn't do in-person. I think we should have in-person seminary, but there is a cost to that. It is a costly model. And even if the students don't pay that, even if it's scholarship, even if it's paid for by endowment, that's still a cost that's being incurred. And theoretically, that cost could be allocated for other purposes. Now, what would a national church, what are other costs that a national church body could employ? It could be funding church planting, right? It could, and there's all kinds of things. It could instead of, and what I put in the paper, instead of this many pastors, a different model might do, 5 times as many, 10 times as many with a different model, right? So the fact that you chose to do one model that gets X number done versus another model that does, 5X more or 10X more, right? That's a decision that you've made, right? And there's real impact to that. What's driving that? There was a response that was made. I had to make a correction to my blog post, which was a dumb mistake. I had initially looked at the numbers and did what we call napkin math and just was kind of doing some napkin math. And in the process of doing that, I had confused the annual cost with the total cost. And so the multiples were way off. And I was rightly corrected on that. And I had to write a correction to it and apologize because it was so extreme. What's fascinating, though, is when I corrected it, the multiples were still significant. And then I used that opportunity to say, hey, look, you can look at the numbers yourself. Let's be transparent about this. I'm not pulling these numbers out of the hat. So
don't do napkin math is one of the things.
So I would say this, I'm a guy that gets into the ideas and I like to be persuasive. And sometimes I can get more tied up into the rhetoric and something and then forget to cross the T's and check my math.
I think
finance guy, right?
Yeah, I think vision's great on napkins, maybe not math though.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah, but of course.
But yeah, but you did retract, and I saw you sent out an apology and reposted it. And the main thing it sounds like you were getting at is a stewardship opportunity cost question. And in the end, it still landed in a place where, again, not saying that we shouldn't go this direction, but when we do it this way, here is the opportunity cost: is you're not spending those dollars over here, and you could be raising the multiples of pastors, by 5. Was it what was the final kind of
it was between
numbers, if you will, if we chose a different model or pathway?
There's two different Concordias, and they're two different costs, or two different things. And I gave two different online examples, and they had two different costs. And so I think the extreme was like, about a 7 or 8x, and I think the lower was like a 4x. That's still a significant amount. I imagine right now if you could 4x the amount of, let's just go the low end, and you could 4x the amount of pastors that you're producing. Zach, remind me, like, what do we think the estimate is of the annual production of pastors through our systems right now? What would you say that is?
Through our just residential or overall?
Overall.
Oh, I'm not sure. It's over 100, maybe less than 200?
Yeah, somewhere in that range. So what if that was 4x'd, let's get that closer to 1,000. That's actually a reasonable number that we should be expecting for a church body our size, right? And that's part of it is like, this is something we can get into conversation later, but like, what is the outcome that we're expecting for this church body that has decided to keep this process entirely onto itself and not allow congregations, formally to be a part of that process? Well, what do we expect then as a reasonable output if we do consider ourselves a missional church body that should be actively church planting, right? How does that system support a Christ Greenfield that wants to have 20 campuses, or a district that wants to plant 120 churches within a very reasonable period of time? Now, let's just do a little math here. We've got about 5,000 congregations in the synod. Yeah. It's not unreasonable to have an expectation, to have a missionary vision that for each one of those, that there's a, in collaboration, that there's a church plant happening every 5 years. Mm-hmm. Like, missional church bodies do that. And so it's not unreasonable to say a church body like ourselves should be planting 1,000 churches every year within the country, right? And then keeping that ratio going. So that would mean 1,000 plus pastors in a year, right? Unless you're going to steal them from, from another church and leave them vacant. No, there needs to be production, and we've got millions of people in our church body, so it's not, a bad expectation. The question is, does the system support that? The outcome should be required, but does the system support that? And so then it becomes a stewardship question. How can I do that efficiently, right? And our church body has toyed around with different ways to do this efficiently. There's a history to that.
So when we talk about the cost of pastoral formation, what are there, in your estimation, costs that we talk about too much and then other costs that we don't talk about enough?
Well, we talk about residential being a tuition-free program. It's not tuition-free. Somebody's paying that. Right? It could be that, and I don't know the specifics of how that's all scholarship. It could be that's endowment funding that's covering that. That's great. Again, in theory, that's resources that could be allocated somewhere else or could be used to multiply even more pastors for the same amount of money. The cost to the student, the cost to the congregation. So let's talk about costs. I believe very strongly in a residential program. When I was going to college as a 20-something, I had zero desire whatsoever to be part of an online program. I loved going to campus and hanging out with other students and hanging out with professors. That was like, I was a professional student at the time. It was great. I loved it. I'm in a master's program right now. I couldn't even conceive of the idea of quitting my job. I mean, imagine this right now. Let's just say in theory, there have been people that have done my role that have decided to transition from an executive director to an executive pastor. Imagine the hardship that it would create if I left my church right now to go to a residential program for several years and and left.
Yeah.
Like, this is a type of calling that I'm doing right now. And I think that's the issue, is like, sometimes we talk about the suitability of pastors, like, hey, if they're not willing to do this, then they're not worthy. Let's move beyond that.
I hate that argument.
Who are discerning these conversations, they're already serving in a community where they know this is the community that I'm quote unquote called to serve. Maybe there's not been an ordination process to do that, but that doesn't mean that you're not called to serve that community. And to be torn out of that community, that's a tremendous cost that's being borne both by the person that has to leave and by the community that suffers that vacancy, with no guarantee that that person's coming back, right? And so ripping people out of that context, that's a huge cost and can be very destructive. And, we've heard some really powerful, in the Koinonia that we were at, some really powerful testimonies of, like, hey, this person essentially had a Bible study that eventually became a church. Do we really want to tear that person out of that community for years? What's going to happen to that community in that vacancy? It's going to fall apart, right? That leadership matters. Having a visionary leader to keep this ministry going matters, right? So that's a huge cost, and I think that's a cost that doesn't get a fair hearing. And I didn't bring that up in the podcast, but it is something that I've talked about. In the blog article, but it's something we've talked a lot about in our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the cost also of the individual, even if it is tuition free, of, really, if you're doing, most people that are going the residential route have 4 moves, 1 to St. Louis, 1 to Vicarage, 1 back, and then 1 out. That's a lot of moves. 4 moves in 4 years is a whole lot. And
if you have a family and a business and, again, an existing ministry where you serve, man, the cost is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how do local congregations like yours, like ours, especially the larger ones, like, how do we what is our responsibility? What do you feel like your responsibility is in kind of the formation process in our synod and alongside of seminaries? Like, how do we do this well and work together?
Yeah. Well, the passion that drives me is because I serve at Christ Greenfield and we have a vision for a multi-site campus, and I don't see a way of doing that apart from raising leaders internally.
And that's exactly where I'm at. Yeah.
I need a national body that supports that vision. Right.
Or at least doesn't get in the way.
I
might settle for that right now.
At least give permission for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. Exactly. Like, you want
to hope it supports it, but
right.
Geez.
That's one of the reasons why we ran our experiment with the Luther House program. Now, we knew going in there that we weren't going to be able to ordain people. We would love to have a conversation around that and, challenge the systems to say, interview these people and see if they're suitable, right? I think I'm going to just be really harsh on that. Any roadblock that says we're not going to at least interview these people, I'm just going to throw this out there. To me, I can't think of any other reason other than institutional protection, other than to do that, right? If these people, they've been trained at a pastoral level of competency, and we need them doing that, to say no, the only rational thing I can think of to say no to is we need to do that to preserve our institutions, right?
Yeah,
and
it's subjective opinions and potentially not a trust that, who formed them or shaped them.
Right.
But that, if you have something objective, interviews, tests, assessments, that's where I think we got to consider those things. Absolutely.
And so that kind of leads a little bit, and you and I can reflect on this, but you and I were just at this Koinonia gathering. By the way, awesome experience. I loved it. I don't know how many Koinonia gatherings there have been. This is certainly the first one I've ever been to. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. We had representatives from over 20 districts show up there. people speaking pro and con on the idea of having an online option for raising pastors, like let's say having an online MDiv program, which I'm very much in favor for. So
because you've done the online, right? That's what you're doing right now, and so
I'm in the process of it right now. Kind of,
yeah, you're obviously working through online right now. So a program. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of it as you're kind of going through it?
Yeah, so I'm in the Luther House of Studies. Just out there, I'm not seeking ordination. I'm doing that because as an executive director, I'm supervising people in a wide array of ministry roles. In our org chart, everybody reports to me, and then I report to Tim, right? So it's not that there's not a senior pastor overseeing everything there is, but he's overseeing them through me. So one of the benefits of that is that I've got a really strong Lutheran mind, and that does apply the way that I lead, right? And I get involved in our member onboarding systems, and I try to understand things from the Lutheran lens. And honestly, I love it. I help teach our new member class. I'm considered one of the strongest Lutheran apologetics teachers on our staff when it comes to talking to people outside of Lutheranism around the topic of sacraments and decision theology and stuff like that. Because I've came from these backgrounds, right? And then I've gotten this great education experience. But what I'll tell you about my personal experience going through the program, first of all, extremely rigorous, very, very rigorous program. The way that I would say these are some opportunities, people may or may not like that. They talked about some great models at the Koinonia. The model that Luther House has is they have lectures that are very engaging. They have reading, right? So you're reading the confessions, you're reading academic papers and stuff like that. And then you have a weekly Zoom meeting where you talk about what you've read and what you've heard in the lectures. You'll also do reflection questions on that, but you're suffering the content in a class with people online via Zoom, so the same types of conversations and questions that you would do in person, you're having those same types of conversations and questions in a Zoom meeting. Very dynamic conversations are happening. Those are recorded and posted online. If sometimes you can't make them, so you can see those after the fact. Then you have assignments. You got to write papers. You got to do exams, that kind of stuff. Some of the exams that they do, like you're literally writing while they're logged into your Google Doc and watching you write to make sure that you're not cheating in that. Yeah. So it's very robust. And then, they talked about community. So I'm in they call it a fellowship group. So in addition to the classes that they do, I attend a fellowship group, which is done online. But, you've got people all over the world that are in this fellowship group. So we had a person that was from Venezuela. And think about everything they're going through in Venezuela right now. So they're talking about their ministry challenge in Venezuela. A Lutheran in Venezuela talking about their ministry challenges there. And then you got people in the Midwest and people in the South and people from Florida, and they're all talking about their various backgrounds. A lot of people who have, there's a lot of LCMC people in this program. What's interesting about that program is they do an amazing job recruiting people from outside of Lutheranism to become pastors, and then they got to quickly ramp them up to have a Lutheran mindset as they're preaching, and they're passionate. By the end of this program, they're passionate Lutherans, right? And very well articulate and preach really, really well. I don't agree 100% with everything they teach. They are not 100% down the line with the LCMS, and I know what those distinctions are. Third use of the law, women's ordination. I agree with the LCMS positions on those things. They know that. They don't try, they're very passionate about their topic of third use of the law. I get it. It's a worthy debate. I don't, at the end of the day, fully align with them on that. I think, I don't know if I 100% align with the LCMS, what a professor would teach about it, but I think that I do agree with that there is a third use of the law, and that, but it's not, you're not saved by the third use. So, right. I think that we can agree on that. So that's an important distinction. But it's a great program, and the people that have gone through that are passionate advocates of Lutheranism in our community. And our community has become much more robustly Lutheran because we've been giving lay people the opportunity to go through this program, and there are more champions of a confessional approach towards faith in our community. And that's important because we are a community that does an amazing job reaching non-Lutherans and bringing them in there.
Yeah.
And so it's messy. It's messy doing that. So the more we can, have more voices speaking into that and enable more lay people to do that, it makes us a much, much more healthier organization.
Beautiful. What would you say? Let's a lot of strengths. What are the limitations or weaknesses? Because you've gone to both. Like you said, Arizona State. You've done some in-person stuff there in your past, and now you're doing online. And so, what are some of the limitations or weaknesses that you might notice?
I guess while the classes in the Luther House program are run synchronously, technically speaking, it is still an asynchronous program. And so, you can, in theory, say, okay, well, I'll, hand in my assignment a couple months from now. And that's gotten me into a little bit of trouble. I think I would flourish a little bit better in a system that's got a little bit more rigid deadlines tied to it, which is Jeff's program, the program that Jeff Clow has been putting together.
Out of the center.
Yeah. Yep. And so I think from that perspective, I could see myself maybe thriving a little bit more under that type of system because I would take the deadlines a little bit more serious.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful. And we'll talk about Koinonia reflections in just a moment. And one of those, was around, Jeff Clow, who presented kind of 6 different online models, and they're each different. And
they're different.
Let's talk about these. But before we even get to there, I kind of want to get to what I felt like was one of the major impetuses for us even gathering. And it was obviously from you guys on your Lead Time podcast.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask this carefully, not to, kind of relitigate some things, but because it connects deeply to why that gathering even took place, and trust and how we talk, can we talk? And so I'd love to hear kind of from you as a co-host of Lead Time, watching Tim Allman be asked to stop speaking publicly about pastoral formation was a visible moment for a lot of people. And it really helped me see that we're not in a healthy place if people that are trying to develop leaders and trying out new things aren't even able to talk about this stuff anymore. So I'd love to hear from your seat, how did that feel for you, and what do you think that moment revealed about where we are, or where we were at least as a church body at that point?
Yeah. So I'll peel back first of all, I want to say, this process was handled by Mike Gibson coming and speaking to Tim and to our board, and I was there. I was present for it. I have a lot of love and respect for our district president, and I know he loves the ministry here at Christ Greenfield, but he has to wear multiple hats, and he had to come in wearing a hat as a synod representative. I think the thing that was most startling to me, there was some photos that went out where somebody had presented one of our graduates with a stole. That wasn't something that we had sanctioned doing that. We did not ordain this person. Some people had used the term pastor in connection to this person because, again, we do a great job reaching people outside of the LCMS, and outside of the LCMS the word pastor has a different connotation than it does for people that grow up entirely LCMS. And so sometimes that term is thrown around out there. He is the campus leader, but he was not ordained. But somebody had given him a stole, and I guess he had a photo taken with that, which was a very gracious thing for him to do. But he was not ordained. But I could see where some people had thought that that's something that we had done. So Tim was very clear about saying, no, that's not the case of what's been done. I'll tell you right now, Ryan's a great guy. I think he should be interviewed. I believe that the colloquy process should be opened up for him. He's a great guy, and I believe he should be considered for a colloquy to do that. I know the system doesn't allow it, but I believe it should. I'm just saying that, right?
Yeah.
But that being said, yes, we understand that there's a rule in place that we're not allowed to do that when we have to obey that rule. Tim agrees, and he got in there and publicly made sure that he would apologize for anything that might imply that that's something that happened, which it didn't. But tied to that was kind of a request to say that we would be silent on the topic of pastoral formation. Now, the rationale for that kind of was this, that there are rules that say that pastors should not be speaking publicly in social media against the doctrine of the church. So my question first was, wait a minute, we're not talking about the confessions here. We're talking about bylaws and resolutions. So is the assertion that resolutions are the doctrine of the church? And the answer to me was yes. And that really got to me as somebody who's going through, a Lutheran master's program. That really is like, what? And so popes and councils don't err, right? Right. That's what we walked through for a season. Tim agreed to be silent because of the concerns of what that could mean for Christ Greenfield. And then kind of what was brought up was this idea of doing a dissent process, because there is a dissent process for people who have to say something about doctrine that maybe we have an issue that's troubling our conscience about it. We need to have a conversation for it. So we kind of suggested or had a conversation about starting a dissent process. When that became public knowledge, then there was more conversation about doctrine of the church, and that position that this is doctrine of the church got walked back and was clarified and saying, no, you're not violating the doctrine of the church by talking about this issue. Okay, now we can talk about pastoral formation again on our podcast. So while that was being adjudicated by the powers, the national powers, we were honoring that. And I'm glad that a decision was made correctly, in my opinion, that was not considered doctrine of the church. There might be some people listening here saying it should be, but it's not. Right? Doctrine of the church, as far as I know, still boils down to scripture and confession and nothing more. Yeah. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think one of the challenges is when people look in and see things that don't have the full context, that make assumptions. And we live in a day and age where that happens, and we have to be more careful. I have to be more careful. Yeah. Our public witness is important, and we don't want to make things confusing. And yet, at times, as pioneers, there has to be some sort of grace for we're not going to get it right every time, and we will listen and we will acknowledge, but we have to be brothers about this and do it in the right way. And so I'm grateful that through that process, though I don't agree with how everything was happened and with some of the conclusions that came from it, it really was the start of, so let's do it the right way then. Let's get brothers and a few sisters in the room and talk about pastoral formation. And that's what the Koinonia project was all about in Las Vegas. Was for
initially intended to be a dissent process that got turned into a Koinonia because this isn't a doctrinal.
Right, it's a practical, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought it was a really great event.
Yes.
And we need to have more of these. We've had some Koinonia groups or projects happen in Nebraska. I've not been a part of one, but I know from our district president that we've had a couple of those on some issues. And they haven't been conferences, but they've been small groups that meet together either monthly or every other month to talk about something. And I think, great, cool. We should bring together people that have differing opinions and talk about these things. So I'd love to kind of, though, break that down from you and kind of share some reflections for those that weren't there. I want to kind of bring them into the room so that they kind of understand what happened in Vegas. What happened in Vegas, I don't think should stay in Vegas in this case.
I'm not staying there.
So we're breaking the rules of Sin City, but from your seat, let's start on the encouraging side, and then I want to talk about the concerning side too. But what did you see from your seat? What stood out the most on the encouraging side of things?
I loved the collegialness of the conversation. So it was a conversation that was, first of all, Mike did a wonderful job kind of reminding us what is actually our unity, right? And it took us back to our confessions and the creeds, right? And then these are the things that really unite us. So let's be united in those things. He talked about what the meaning of koinonia is, the heart of having conversations where we can try and seek unity, maybe give the best construction on people if they differ with us on certain opinions. And I appreciated that. And then it was very worshipful to start. And then we had some presentations, and we had some presentations in favor of, I guess, what you would call the proposition, the main proposition being there should be some online cost-effective programs that lead people to general ordination. And, that should be embraced, not at the exclusion of an in-person program. Nobody who's advocating for an online program is advocating for shutting down in-person seminary. I see that as something that's going to always be part of our history as a church body and as a treasure. But I think we can be a both and entity. So it's a both and proposition versus a mostly one way only proposition. And we had people give presentations for and against that. I'll just, I'll put my cards on the table here. I felt that those who were presenting in favor of it did a much better job articulating why it's necessary and why it's permissible and why it's necessary. I think both of those things are true. I don't demean the heart of people that were opposed to that. One of the interesting comments by somebody who was advocating for the residential program primarily is to say, hey, if you had a doctor, a surgeon, would you feel more comfortable knowing that they went to a residential program or that they did their program online? Fair enough of a comment to struggle with. However, these are the types of comments that people at the table are saying, like, okay, what if your doctor was being apprenticed by another doctor in a very long, one-on-one residency, and then his training was complemented with online training? Most people would feel like really wonderful about that, So those are the kinds of models that we're thinking about when we're thinking about online program. And nobody's advocating for an online program where you watch a video and then you click a box and you've completed the class, right? And that's not what anybody's advocating for. They're advocating for robust training where people have to actually, suffer the content and work through it and have some of those, sort of rebirth moments what they have, like, oh, aha, those kind of things. And, some of the things I've had in my own programs, like, it gives me a headache thinking through this stuff, right? Until I've had enough time to really suffer through it. And that's what we're looking for, So we had another person advocate in favor of a primary residential program. And his reason was, well, we need languages, right? And then the other reason was, here's all these really wonderful experiences I had. That's great. Again, nobody's saying not to do that. I guess when our table spoke about it, what our table agreed with was like, yes, as a church body, we need to have world-class scholarship on languages. That's something that our church body needs. It's not necessarily the case that every pastor needs that as a barrier to entry into ministry. Some cases, yes. It kind of depends on the job description. If you're going to be a professor, yes. If there's certain jobs, maybe a seminary, a college president, maybe yes, So I think that's a very case-by-case situation. And by the way, that's something that can be dealt with ongoing education, right? And I think that's the other part too, is like, we talked about the concept of ongoing education. A lot of times people feel, I've got the MDiv, I'm done. I've learned everything. I am a master of the divine, right? Right? And there's nothing more for me to learn. Well, we know that's not true. There's much more for people to learn. Can we be a church body that embraces continuing education? I've given this analogy. I come from the military. The military has the best residential officer training in the world, West Point, and the vast majority of the officers they train are in ROTC. These programs work together. They complement each other. They don't create shortages at West Point, and the officers they train in non-residential programs at the local university. They create awesome officers, even as they're living and working within their local community. And it's a very practical program. And really great officers have been formed out of that. Colin Powell was a guy that was a private when he joined, and then he went to ROTC and eventually became Chief of Staff and Secretary of State, right? So there's opportunities to find brilliant people and bring them up in these alternative paths, and through continuing training, get them up to the areas that they need to be for more advanced types of jobs.
Yeah, that I was really struck with the way I kind of described it is these conversations feel very hot, very heated online and in comments and messages and or in sort of echo chambers. For or against, if you meet with a bunch of pastors that already think like you, they feel very, very hot. It didn't feel that way at all in Las Vegas. It felt very cool, very fraternal, very charitable. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and actually one of my takeaways was I loved it so much, and multiple people kind of said this. What if going into a district or a national convention, we could already identify some of the motions that needed to be voted on, where we know it's not going to be 90-10, right? It's going to be 48-52 kind of a vote, probably. Why don't we hold some Koinonia conversations on that in advance, where people can really have an opportunity to have a Christian loving conversation around these topics, and really be respectful about it, and actually be able to articulate both sides of the conversation and really get at the heart of it, so that they're making an actual informed discernment decision in that and be at peace with it. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I've been to a district conference, if something just pops up out of the blue, or I've not had enough time to really think about it, I've got and we've got 20 minutes of debate. Am I really going to be informed on this topic? Right. And feel good about something, especially when it seems like there's division on this. Right. And so I see tremendous potential in that. And it seemed like a lot of leaders coming out of that were starting to think, what else could we have Koinonia conversations on? And I really hope that happens.
And I think that'd be helpful. I'm just with logistics and time and calendar, I'm a little skeptical that we could pull that off for this one and have anything meaningful. Yeah. But at the same time, could we not use these channels, your podcast, my podcast, others? And, what would it look like to have a series where we are bringing the top 10 resolutions or overtures or whatever it might be, and to have a person on each side just to talk about it? That's sort of the feel is like, I'd love to actually have more conversations. Koinonia, right? Yeah, it could be. Just here's some things that, here's the reason why it was written, here's why people would agree with it, here's why people would disagree with it, and have the people talk and share. We disagree on a lot more than we disagree with. Mm-hmm. And so it felt very encouraging in that way, that we can be fraternal and charitable in these conversations for sure. One of the things I was kind of struck, and so I'd love to get your take on it, is it was kind of positioned, as residential versus an online MDiv. And I think some of us at the end of it or during it was like, I don't know if that's really the actual conversation, like a versus, but it turned a lot more into focused on really the whole room felt very pro SMP, and how do we take SMP and which is an online form with some in person, but make it even greater and roll it out even more. And so I still think we need to have the MDiv conversation on that. But what were your thoughts? I feel like a lot of people were there, not only because of what happened with Tim and through the PSD, but because of the policy restrictions that just got rolled out in November. There were several people that that's why I came.
Right. So, and we had a presenter, I guess he's the president of the SELC district. He got up and gave some very, very powerful testimony conversations about pastors that have been raised up through SMP that are having tremendously impactful roles right now that would not be considered under the new rules that have been put in place. Some of the large churches, we're hearing about restrictions that if you're over 1,000 members, that you won't be considered. well, this is like a multi-site campus with this many people. That's like an ideal place for an SMP
100%.
person to be serving in, with other people that have gone through the residency program, right? And under the supervision and being mentored by, that's like a wonderful place to be serving.
And Jack, I'll just throw out my cards out there. That's how our third campus is an SMP pastor, and it's like, man,
Right.
we're pretty new into the SMP process. That's a brand new campus for us, but I'm like, this is a really effective model, and probably what we were going to do moving
Right.
forward. And it's like, okay. No longer.
Right.
So it's like,
so what do we
I don't
do
know what
now?
else to do than to use my microphone and my influence
Right.
and to join in conversations. Like I paid my own way to get to Vegas to be there to talk about this because I believe in it.
Right. And then, the 40 years plus requirement. Well, there's a lot of people, again, where that community calling has already been established well before the age of 40. The one that I brought up earlier, that, hey, you are embedded in this community. You are serving that community. You're giving spiritual care for that community. Maybe you're teaching Bible study in that community. So we are ignoring, again, and this is where I get a little bit concerned about, like, maybe we're not fully honoring our confessions in this area. The right of the community to call is absolute. Yes, churches have agreed not to call people if they haven't been rostered. But where are we honoring the fact that calls are emerging oftentimes before a rostering status has happened? Do we believe that the Holy Spirit can do that or not? And if that's happening, then we need to have a system in place to get those people properly trained and ordained, right? Mm-hmm. We need to just honor that, right? And some communities are doing that, are facilitating that on purpose. And if more people are being reached by the gospel, that's a good thing. It's a good and godly thing. I would say couple of things. We need to eliminate these restrictions. We got to get rid of the size restriction and the age restriction right off the bat. I don't have a problem with encouraging people in their 20s to first consider residential. I think it's a good thing to do that. If you've set up roots, right, I think it should be really, what is the need of the congregation? What is the district president thinking? These are things. What I don't agree with is a coercive approach, right? I believe in an influential approach. I don't believe in a coercive approach towards that. I do think that there should be more permission giving into that area. So I think it should be opened up to more people. I think that the infrastructure needs to be built out so that you can have larger cohorts. I believe that scholarship funds, endowment funds, whatever funding sources are being used to make residential programs tuition-free, that some of those resources ought to be also directed towards the SMP program to bring those costs down so that they're competitive with other online courses out there, which would probably mean bringing it down by like maybe at least a half or something like that to make it much more cost-effective. And then the other part is just like, hey, I don't even have a problem with the limited, personally with the limited license that somebody's given to be called to just a specific area, but then just making it very clear that there's a continuing ed program that leads you to that general status, right? And then continuing to support that and foster that and encourage that. And then I think if you really do that, then you've really solved a lot of problems out there, right? Yeah. I think the problem is that people see the number of people going through SMP and say, that's not good. We need to put our thumbs on the scale and get more people into residential because they want that as an outcome. So that takes me to another topic. I just want to bring this up. Okay. Outcomes.
Yeah,
outcomes
that was
an
big.
Issue that came up.
That was a big thing that came up.
Yes.
Talk about those.
Outcomes was an issue because I know in the conversations that I had in multiple tables and with multiple people in the room it goes something like this. Our church body has decided these are the systems we're going to allow. These are the systems we're not going to allow. We put hard resolutions and policy around systems, and they've delegated the outcomes to faculty. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're using governance to manage systems, and we're not holding accountability on outcomes. That's not healthy governance, in my opinion. The governance of the church that I'm in, policy, and some people do policy-based, Healthy governance focuses on outcomes, and it gives flexibility on systems. And I think that's another thing that we need to be thinking about as a church body is, yes, let's mandate opening up the SMP and strengthening it as a gradual pathway to general ordination and making it less effective. Those things need to happen. But we also need to talk about, here are the outcomes that churches need from pastors, right? Now, the question that I had is, could we as a church body actually have unity on those outcomes?
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you right now, the Southwest District would love people that can support both traditional and contemporary worship really, really well, right? But the system is not necessarily supporting that outcome. And that decision is being made by faculty, and they're saying, well, I'm in compliance with the system. Right? And so that's the issue here. So I would say what I would love, and you know, what do we want for the future of the LCMS? I would love that there is a grassroots movement led by churches, led by districts, to bring unity around these are the outcomes that pastors should be trained towards for the benefit of congregations. And congregations are like, yep, that's what we need, right?
Yeah.
And that's the accountability. And then it's not just those outcomes, it's like how many people, right? Because where before I get like at least 1,000, maybe 1,200 people a year, that's what we should be holding them accountable to. You know, well, the system doesn't let it. Let's lift some of the rules on the systems. Let's give permission on the systems. Let's hold accountability to the outcomes, right? Let's make sure there's good process for assessing the outcomes, and that we're hitting the quantity and the quality that's needed, and then give flexibility on the systems. We need to be more innovative as a church body and be more results driven, right?
Yep. I think that's fabulous. So we're hopefully unifying on the outcomes. This is what the local church, which, by the way, last I checked, the synod and the seminaries exist to serve the local churches. So we need to come together and say, y'all are here to serve us. We love you and we want to be in partnership with you. But this is the outcomes we need. We need you to be, we need the institutions to be open-handed enough to say, great, we need to figure out how do we then create those outcomes. And what was one of the more powerful, Bob Sundquist would say he gave a pretty boring presentation, and I would probably agree. But Bob talked about the history of education in the LCMS, and this feels very much like for the 150 plus years that we've been around, that we've been very flexible and open-handed with our education models, kind of up until the last 15, 20 years. And so talk about that. Is that what you kind of heard from Bob? That there's been this open-handedness to how we've done this in the past. Why can't we keep that going?
There's a historical rhyme to it. Yeah. You saw this weird history of like creating these practical systems, right? He uses the word practical and theoretical systems. Practical systems, and then you have these theoretical systems, and then people get anxious about the fact that there's too many people going practical. We need more people going theoretical, so they close down or they restrict the practical and they shift people over to the theoretical, but then there's a bottleneck and there's not enough pastors, and so then they create this urgency around practical. And then you'll hear words like, when they create more practical systems, you'll hear phrases like, so, to get these people as trained as soon as possible. Right?
That's in our history,
there's vacancies, right?
We need them. Yeah.
We need them
for the
now.
Sake of the gospel.
So congregations are asserting themselves, saying, we need these guys right away. Right? And so we're in that cycle right now. History is repeating itself. We have shifted heavy towards the theoretical. Both residential seminaries are high academic, theological seminaries. I mean, these guys come out, in theory, with the kind of curriculum that they're doing, they should be college professors. Holy cow, these guys are so well trained. A lot of small churches are okay with a more practical-based approach towards pastoral development. And again, I'll push back. I don't believe it's beneficial that every pastor understands the languages. I don't believe it's necessary as a barrier to entry that you have a mastery of languages to start as a pastor. I think it's something that's great, for a lot of people for continuing ed, and there's a lot of great tools online now where you can go find out what a Greek word meant.
Yeah.
And if the LCMS continues to be a great repository to that, they can make it accessible not just to pastors but to lay people as well.
Yeah. How about on the flip side, Jack? Did you find anything concerning or like frustrating about, as you kind of ponder? We're just a day away from coming back from Vegas as we're recording this. Anything that like, oh man, oof.
Well,
Yeah.
I will say this. This is something that aches my heart a little bit. One of the speakers got up and said, whatever your concerns are, just go and do your own thing. Bring it to the synod in convention and they will give you a fair hearing. And then we talked about that in our tables. And then people got up and spoke about it. And there was multiple tables that said, we agree on certain things. We don't agree that there will be a fair hearing on this issue. And
we agree that we disagree on that. Yeah.
We agree to disagree on the assertion that there will be a fair hearing. Right? There was a white paper made. It was looked at. I do know that it was looked at. Was a fair
when you say
hearing
white
given.
paper, I know what you're talking about, but explain what you mean by that.
There was a collaborative effort that had at least a dozen districts attached to it that kind of said, this is a vision that we have for online pastoral formation, and we want the seminaries to consider it. We want the pastoral formation to, and there was a kind of even a commitment coming out of convention saying we'll look at it. And I think, was it really looked at? Well, it was looked at. And then it was kind of disregarded. So is that a fair hearing? I don't know. I guess it depends on how you define that, right? And so I think the people that put that together, I don't know that they feel like that was a fair hearing, whether it was or wasn't. And I think a lot of people right now are wondering, let's put it this way: when is the hyper focus on systems designed intentionally so that people in the system can put their thumb on the scale for outcomes that have not been universally agreed on? Mm-hmm. I think that's a question people are asking. And, if that's the case, is there really fair hearings being said, or happening? And I think that's a gut check for us. And again, I'm not trying to put any single person under a microscope. But the fact that people feel that way is something that we have to take responsibility for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think I'm left, I don't know if you're in the same boat, but I'm left wondering still. Cool, we had 2 good days of conversation. Mm-hmm. I feel closer to the brothers, many of whom I knew, many of whom I didn't. I feel closer to them than I did, and I feel like I understand their heart and their fears, and I feel like they understand my heart, my fears better.
Yes.
The wonderment I have, though, is, does it even matter? And are the right the right people hearing this or in the room? And my sense, my frustration was, and I don't know personal stories and calendars, and if the Koinonia event was determined first and they already had things on their calendar, but I know that the president of our synod, the members of the PFC, the presidents of our seminaries were all invited, and they weren't there. And
it would have been great if they would have been. It would have been extremely helpful.
And to be fair, I know the Seminary St. Louis asked for a debrief the moment after the gathering ended. Great. You'll get a debrief, but again, it'd have been better if you were there. And if not the president, someone who's representative. And so that's my fear and my wonderment of, and probably the last the concern that I have the most walking out of it is like, this was really good, and I just wish, those that kind of make the decisions would hear.
Well, you don't. I'll just. These are just words of encouragement. This is just my own leadership takeaway. People can choose to. It's free advice, so it's worth what you pay for, right? You don't lead well by. Well, I'm gonna put it this way: really good leadership leans into areas where there's conflict, doesn't shy away from it, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I know there's conflict, I want to be in the room. I don't want to be outside the room. And maybe there are legitimate reasons why I can't be in there. I still have to deal with the fact that I'm not in the room And that's still an opportunity cost for me, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, there we go. It all comes back to that article you wrote, Jack.
Yeah, it's still an opportunity cost for me if I can't be in the room, right? And so I would say I would love our leaders to prioritize being in the room for these types of conversations. I think there's a cost for not doing that.
Yeah, that's good, Jack.
Yeah.
Hey, bro, this has been super helpful. Anything I didn't ask you that you want to get off your chest or want to talk about?
No, hey man, it's been great. You and I have met before and have talked before, but we got to spend a lot more time over this Koinonia gathering. So it's been really great to kind of get to know you more in person and to spend some time chatting with you. And you're a delightful guy to hang out with. And I love the ministry that you have. I love where you're called at, but also the Red Letter Media ministry that you have and the podcast. It's fantastic. And I love your advocacy and I love your heart. And it's been great chatting with you, brother.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this. We ask all our guests this kind of on the way out, and I didn't send it to you beforehand. I totally forgot. So
okay.
If you could challenge our listeners to do one thing this week, at the end of the day, this is a discipleship podcast. We want them to be greater followers of Jesus. So if you could challenge our listeners to do one thing this week to be a greater disciple, what would you challenge them to do?
What would I challenge them to do? Okay.
That's a big one.
I'm going to get a little spicy here. I'm going to challenge him to read a non-Lutheran book, and I'm going to throw one out there.
You Luther House of Study person.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm going to challenge him to read a book by J.D. Greer, a Baptist, but called Gaining by Losing. And I got to meet him in person at a conference. I joked. It was at a conference of XPs, right? And they were kind of doing it in different spots. And one of the places was Summit Church, which is his church.
Yeah.
And he came in and he introduced himself. And I jokingly said, "Hey, I'm the token Lutheran here." And he said, "Oh, Luther." And he's like, "I just went on a tour of Wittenberg." He's like, "I love Luther." And, he took me to his office. He's got this giant portrait of Martin Luther over his desk. And so at the beginning of his book, he talks about the priesthood of all believers and how that has shaped his ministry. And he goes into Luther, and he's not right on the sacraments, but some of his teaching on the priesthood of believers is fantastic. And the way that he holds himself as a minister and how he sees himself as called to equip them is so powerful.
Cool.
And then how that has shaped his model for developing people in-house. And so I would challenge people to read that non-Lutheran book that's heavily influenced by Luther and implemented by a Baptist and see what can we learn without violating our scripture and confessions. What can we learn from that book?
Well, I'll be real with you. I think that's a cool challenge because I think that priesthood of all believers is one of the gems that I think we are totally jacking up when we have these sorts of conversations and elevate the office of pastor in some of the ways and conversations that you hear. And so I'd love for us to get a more healthy, truly Lutheran. And if we got to learn it from a Baptist, that's just interesting.
That's good.
That's good, bro. All right. Hey, last thing. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
So obviously they can connect to us at uniteleadership.org is a great way to connect if you're interested in anything that we do at the Unite Leadership. If you're trying to get a hold of me personally, Kalleberg at cglchurch.org. But I am always eager. I am always eager to try and reach out to people who want to talk and gather insights.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations, especially around developing the executive director role of the church, and I'm looking forward to. I've got a talk on it at one of the sessions at the BPM. So
nice.
if you'd like to hear
Very
more
cool.
about that, come join us for that. Yeah.
Well, I think that anybody that listened to this and has hung all the way to the very end.
Yes.
Just had a great opportunity cost of how they spent the last hour and change,
exactly.
Right? Amen. Well, cool, bro. I'm sure I'll see you at BPM in February. And thanks for being a pioneer and a leader. I know it's not easy, and I know there's unnecessary shots, and yet you carry on. And so you're an inspiration. What you guys do is really making a difference, not just locally, but nationally. And so thanks for putting your voice to a lot of these things. And so let's keep talking. Thanks, Jack.
Right, thank you, brother. God bless.
Well, there you go. I loved having Jack on, getting to know him more, and super honored that he would come onto the podcast. I do think it's such a valuable conversation that we had in Las Vegas at the Koinonia gathering. And will these conversations continue to happen? Can we have charitable conversations online? And I think it's super valuable to look at the opportunity cost of how we're forming pastors. Everything that we say yes to, there's a lot of things we say no to. And that's valuable conversation to have. And so thank you, Jack, for coming on and being willing to share your voice. We got such good episodes coming out. We got incredible guests like Michael Ziegler of the Lutheran Hour Ministries, and both of the co-hosts, Tanner Olson and Shelley Schwalm of the last year's National Youth Gathering. Tim Allman's actually coming back. He's got a book coming out. We'll talk about that. And so much more, including a conversation with Mart Thompson, the SMP director at Concordia in St. Louis, the seminary. So don't miss a future episode. And the best way for you not to miss is to subscribe or follow on whatever listening or viewing platform is your fave. And so we would love to be included in your weekly rotation of things you listen to help you become a greater disciple of Jesus. God bless you and have a great week. And we'll see you back next week for the Red Letter Disciple. Peace.